Many people come into the gym wanting to build a better butt or your glute muscles. While this is awesome for your self-confidence and of course for the shape of your body, the glutes have many other functions that are also really important for your health. Not only does building strong glutes help your big, powerful compound movements, such as your squats, your deadlifts, your lunges, they are also awesome for your posture and your low back health. Having strong glutes helps to support your lumbar area and make sure that you don't get those aches and pains from sitting at a desk. Now, the first thing about coming to the gym and wanting to build your glutes, most people go straight to those big exercises like squats, lunges and deadlifts. Now, while they're all awesome movement patterns, the problem here is a lot of people are coming to the gym from a sedentary job or they have not been using their bum at all. So what happens is when they start doing those exercises, they straight away start overcompensating with their quads, their hamstrings, and everywhere except their butt, which of course means it's not going to grow and you're not going to get the shape that you want. Now today I want to give you a little bit more advice and education on the glute muscles and why you need to do exercises specific to train them to make sure that you do actually use them properly. Now first up, I want to explain what the glutes are. Now you may know them as the big round part on the back of your legs, your bum, but there are actually three glute muscles. You've got glute max, which is the big one, the big round one. You've got glute medius on the side, which is on the side of your hip, and then also one underneath called glute minimus. They all are involved in slightly different movements of your glutes. So the problem here is if you're not doing those movements, then they're going to get a little bit weaker and going to end up not being worked in those big movements, and of course it's not going to help you with your posture. Now, the four main movements of the glutes are, if I step back, the hip extension. So if I stand from the side, any movement that is opening the front of your hip, so lengthening this angle, is called hip extension. So in a deadlift, you're doing hip extension, or we're going to do a hip thrust, which is hip extension as well. Another movement is hip abduction. So taking the leg away from the midline of the body, that is called abduction. And then you've got internal and external rotation of your hip. Those four movements are the main movements of the glutes. If you're not training those, then they're not going to get your glutes nice and strong. Now today I'm going to go through four movements that you can do to help improve your glute strength, functionality and shape. Now the first exercise I'm going to go through today is a hip thrust, and this is for your hip extension movement. Now as I said before, hip extension is opening the front of the hip. So what it's going to look like is this movement. Now the reason I choose the hip thrust is because you're actually at your maximum load at the top of hip extension. So it means it gets your glutes nice and strong against a weight. Now this is going to apply across to your movements such as deadlifts and squats, because when you're coming up and standing up out of the movement, you want to be able to use your glutes. Now when you're doing a hip thrust, you want to start leaning into a bench. You're going to place a weight over your hips. Now you can start with a little dumbbell to begin with, or you can start with a big barbell. Then you'll bring your legs up to around about 90 degrees, maybe a little closer, maybe a little further depending on your body. Then you push yourself up. Now see, I'm in full hip extension here. I've got my glutes on. I'm not arching my back and using my quads instead. So to do this, you want to hinge down, so keeping your back nice and straight. Then at the bottom here, I push the floor away and come up, squeezing my glutes against the weight. And that is practicing hip extension. It's one of my favourite exercises for strengthening up your glutes. The second exercise for hip abduction, where you're moving the leg away from the body, is just a simple side step. So to do this, I have a band above my ankles. And all I'm going to do is hinge over a tiny bit just to keep the weight in my heels and keep the tension on my glutes. And all I do is step to the side, then tap, and then step back. So see how I'm bringing the leg away from my midline and then back again. This is training mainly your glute medius muscles on the side of your glutes. The third movement is hip external rotation. Now what this looks like is externally rotating the hip and moving the leg away from the midline, but for a rotation rather than just abduction. So to do this one, you do a standing external rotation. All I do is have the band above my knees, then I hinge over, again to weight the heels and use my glutes. Then I want to push my knees out against the band. So see how I'm rotating the actual femur at the hip? That's going to use my glute medius muscles and also be very functional for your squats and deadlifts as well. Because if you're not getting hip external rotation, often you get what's called knee valgus, where you fall in, which is a big common cause of knee pain. The last movement is hip internal rotation. Now, while this sounds like a bit of a contrast to external rotation, your glutes are also involved in rotating the hip inwards. Now, why this is important is because if you don't train them both ways, you can get really weak in internal rotation, which can be a big cause of a lot of injuries. So for internal rotation, you get into almost a clamshell position, which means your hips are stacked on top of each other, your knees are stacked on top of each other, and you roll a little bit forward. You don't want to be rocking backwards like this. Then what you do is you pin your knees together and then you rotate by opening your foot and twisting from the hip, okay? So it's internal rotation at the hip, and you should feel the side of those glute muscles working but in the opposite direction. I find this one really great if you have piriformis issues or any issues with tightness across the muscles of your glutes, to make sure that you're evening up your external and your internal rotation. So it's an awesome thing to want to build your glutes for your confidence and for your shape. But as you can see, there are so many other ways that the glutes are really important for in your life as well. Hopefully these tips have helped you out to make sure that you can build a nice, strong behind. And next time, make sure you save this so you can use it in the gym.